Okay, so what I have here is my basic head mesh. Right now there's no kind of eyebrows, eyelashes. I do have teeth and gums, so I'll talk a little bit about that. This is just a Z tool that I have, and again, this is low poly. Um, what we're going to wind up doing is a system in using a system inside of ZBrush called layers. So in this case, I don't have any of my divisions. I basically created a new branch of tools. So I'll show you what that looks like. If I go back to my character model, so here's where I basically change the numbering system and actually start to identify now, 25 is maybe the last of my kind of concept models. And this one, the skin tone is a bit paler. I don't know if I have any divisions. I think I've removed divisions, which is okay because if we have textures, we can use textures from another version that has higher divisions. And I do think I have that maybe a couple of versions earlier. Let me just double check that. Yeah, so this one has 5 divisions. So I could always come back to this one and bake out my textures. The mesh is essentially the same. So in this case, yeah, I've basically reworked this model. Oops. Are we back here? Yeah, I'll go back to this one. And yeah, let me just reset all of this again. Sorry, I'll take that out. So I'll show you how I prep this stuff. There we go. I'm just going to expose just the mesh and delete the subtools. So one of the issues I'll mention first is that I did have a problem with I think the chin being a bit too tucked in. So I think I want to rotate the head up a little bit. So what I recommend doing is if you don't have groups, in this case I think I've organized everything into a head folder. So I'm going to just, if you shift click on the eyeball icons, it'll hide everything but the current active subtool. And what I want to do is actually turn on all the subtools here. Again, I'll pretend I don't have teeth, and we'll come back to that a bit later. I'll delete the teeth. There we go. So if you're wanting to adjust, let's say, the head mesh, I would definitely recommend masking. So I'll show you how I'm going to just pivot this. I might use I'm going to hold Control and click on Stroke and switch to the lasso. This way it's a little bit easier to maybe just select kind of from the base of the neck here up. And then I'm going to Control click on this 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 times. And that way it allows me to really adjust the pivot. I'm going to also hold Alt and click on the circle icon so that I can now kind of rotate this. I'm going to Control click flip the mask around. You notice if I move this, nothing else follows. So if you want the other subtools to follow along so you don't lose the relative positioning of things like the hair, the eyeballs, turn on this icon on the far right side and it'll activate all subtools. Okay. So now we can get her maybe facing a little bit more forward. So we have a little bit more potential range of motion essentially in the head. So we don't want the head tilted back. We don't want it, like this, but we don't want it too tucked in either. Okay. Make sense? So I'll just, just kind of check where I'm at. There we go. That's the way she was. I think she was a bit too tilted. So I'm just going to see that, yeah, maybe things are a little bit more forward. Okay, I think that's good. The other thing you may want to check, sometimes you might have to, let's say, hold Shift. And I use this trick a lot. You hold Shift, you left click and hold, and then let go. And this actually helps blend the mesh and sort of evenly distribute the polys a little bit better. And you can also still use regular Shift, but the problem is it might sort of pull at the silhouette a bit too much. So just be aware of that. I use this technique a lot. Okay, so that's sort of one step. The other thing is that I am using my base resolution of this mesh, and I'm going to just save this before I open up the other one here. Oops. Yeah, so in my kind of work, I had multiple divisions, and sometimes this will happen too, where your lowest division, my lowest division was 5,000 polys. This for me is a bit too low for production, so sometimes what I'll do is I'll take the second division level and make that my base, my actual base mesh. So I would go, once I'm kind of committed to this model, I would say, okay, I'll go to division level 2. Sometimes you could even go division level 3. It just depends on how many polys. So in this case, division level 3 is like 90,000, which for this level of production is too high. I recommend up to 50,000 for the head, 50,000 for the body. So that would be too high, but if I like division level 2, this works okay for me. I would just say delete lower, and that becomes my new base mesh. Also with blend shapes, I'll mention this as well. Yeah, there she is. With blend shapes, if you had other divisions, I would go and delete the higher as well. Again, we can bake this out later on, or maybe already have it baked. But in this case, I would just say delete higher. And that way, because the reason, if you have higher division levels, I'll mention this. If you have higher division levels, the layer system in ZBrush only works at the highest division level available. And when you have high division levels for blend shapes, especially for cartoonier characters, it can be more difficult to control and sculpt and resculpt things as you move things around. The more mesh you have, the slower it is to get really good refined sculpting. So it just really slows down the process. So for me, I prefer to work only at what is going to be my ultimate production low res level mesh. In more advanced productions though, you will likely have things like the low res that you'll do blend shapes of, and then literally do individual sculpts per blend shape. And on some productions, there can be over 200 individual blend shapes for realistic faces, by the way. And it doesn't just incorporate the face, but often incorporates movement in the ears, movement in the neck muscles, right? So there's a lot of sort of subtle micro movements that are kind of taken into consideration. Another thing I like to do as well, so once I've deleted my divisions, I also will use dynamic subdivision. So it's actually like a smoothing preview of what the mesh would in fact look like in production, okay? This way you get a sort of a nice smooth view. This is what it would look like in my viewport, for example, or Unreal, let's say. In this case too, I'm also going to look at, there's maybe some subtle things here, like the eyelids are moving in a bit too far. I also want to make sure I do have this kind of hard eyelid crease, so I'm going to go to ZModeler. And the good news about having dynamic subdivision is that I can still edit this mesh a little bit while it being in a smooth preview mode. So in this case, I'll go to crease. I'll just try crease edge loop complete. So it should go around the eye loop very nicely, and there. So I've got that nice kind of creased look for the eyelids. So let's talk a little bit about generating eyebrows, eyelashes. It's very simple. In this case, I'm going to just create a mask for the brows. Let's just solo for a second. Yeah, for some reason it projected through the back there. So yeah, if I go to, let's say I'll use the subtool palette, I'll go to subtool, extract, I'll hit the extract button. These are very big and chunky, so usually I turn off the thin border, and I'll just turn down the thickness. I usually crank up the smoothness, and then I'll try extract again. So that's not so bad. So once you've got something you like, you hit accept. I'll clear any masking on here, and then I'll pull this, just using a move brush, pull it across where I think it makes the most sense. Again, older, yeah, depending on age, the brows can take on a different shape. In this case, I'm going to use clip curve. You can use clip or slice, but I want to keep the mesh relatively simple. So I'm going to use clip curve, which allows me to just really quickly edit the shape here. Like so. That's not so bad. Okay, and then I'll just do a quick Z-remesh on this. So I'll say keep groups. And I do want a little bit of thickness. Now, you don't have to have this much thickness. You could always take this and push it in a little bit. Oops. Let me just turn off the all subtool option on the gizmo, and then we can pull that in. So you can have it be a little bit closer to the head there. So I'll say half the mesh, maybe keep groups is fine, Z-remesh. In this case, if it's collapsing, it's probably because the poly count is so low. Z-remesher really breaks down under 1,000 polys. So I'll just say keep it the same and Z-remesh there. And that's a little bit better, right? It's a little bit smoother. This is totally fine for a cartoony character, right? Or a bit of a stylized character. And that's it. So that's fine for me. If you wanted to go more realistic, there are brushes you can use. There's fiber mesh, but again, that's for more, I would say, realistic productions. For the eyelids, I'll show you a trick that's quite useful. I'm going to control click on this poly group here, the orange group. So just to show you how this is set up, in this sculpt, I basically have nice circular loops around the eyes, meaning that if I were to go to ZModeler and hit insert, right? This is the way your eyes ideally should be set up, but the ability to just click and drag and add a circular loop, right, is fairly quick and easy and clean. Okay. But in here, yeah, I've got basically this grouping. Now, you don't necessarily have to have the tear duct. I have that added in mine, but if you go and hit the gizmo, which is W, E, or R, and you control click, that will isolate that group. And if I flip the mask around, we now basically have a mask for the upper eyelids. And then I'm going to, just holding control and then alt, I just want to deselect. So I'm basically only affecting the upper eyelid. Yeah, let's try to get another, just like a narrower band for the upper eyelid, okay? And I'll deselect maybe the inner corner there a bit. Again, we'll hit extract. And that's not so bad. So I'm going to go to accept, okay, clear the mask. And I'll get out of solo so I can see that. So again, this is a pretty dense mesh. I'm going to basically just say let's ZRemesh this in half. I don't need to worry about keeping the groups. I basically want to hammer this down till it's here. Let's turn off adapt as well. It might be artificially keeping my poly count really, really high. So then we can basically take a move brush. And I'll do some smoothing, some moving here. Something a little weird here. Let me just double check what's going on there. Now, it looks like there's some broken mesh. So I'm going to just go to weld points. And yeah, I just want to see what is going on with this thing. Maybe it's just a display error, but turn this dot on, try again. Okay, I'll remesh maybe at the same poly count and see. There we go. That's sort of helping. Okay, so if you want as well, you can also try to kind of thin this out a bit. Okay, so that's not a bad way to sort of start the eyelashes. Sorry, turn off this dynamic mode here. I'm just getting the shape in where I'd like it to be, right? And if you want to, I'll divide this up now. I'll hit Control D a couple of times. And if we want, for color, it's very simple. I usually this is my custom interface, but you can just access the paintbrush and then set this to a dark black and hit fill. And we can do this on, let's say, the brows and the eyelashes, sorry. We'll hit fill, so that kind of matches her hair there. And we can basically repeat the same process now for the bottom, right? So very, very simple. By the way, if you wanted, sometimes people want a certain shape in the eyelids. One thing you can do is go and activate Sculptress. I'll show you a little trick to this as well. So if we go to B for brush, S for snake hook, I'll try, yeah, just regular snake hook should be okay. You can then try to, oops. For Sculptress to work, by the way, it does give me an error saying it doesn't want division. So again, I usually will delete lower because I'm kind of in a more sculptural phase now, right? So with Sculptress on, what Sculptress will do, I'll just show you quickly, is that it kind of subdivides the mesh exactly where you need to have more mesh, essentially, to create more detail. So if you wanted to have kind of this, little flare to things, you can do that. And then I would just, again, simply probably go and do half the resolution ZRemesh, and then you'll get a cleaner topology for that, okay? Pretty nice. And then we'll take the bottom and do roughly the same thing. So I'll solo this again, control click, again, the gizmo, this is the shortcut. When you have the gizmo active and you control click, hold on, what's it doing? There we go. Control click on the poly group. It basically isolates that group, and you just control click off the mesh and we flip it. And then I'll just control alt click and drag to demask the bottom area here. And I'll just expand this out a little bit more. Yeah, it doesn't matter about it being too perfect, but I usually like to kind of keep the proportions about the same. Okay, so then we'll go back to extract under subtool. Extract, and we can turn down the thickness. If the thickness seems too much, then just dial it down. Sometimes it's a very subtle amount. Extract, accept, and then, yeah, I'll basically remesh the heck out of this thing. Turn it on half. Make sure you clear any masking too, by the way, and just hit Z remesh. And we can, of course, oops, I'll turn off Sculptress because I do just want to thin this out so it's much, much thinner than this. Get it a solo for a second. Remesh. Okay. I'm just going to thin it out because I do think I want it to be a little bit more subtle. So I'm going to hold Shift and just lower the intensity. So don't forget you can actually drop the intensity of the smooth brush so it's maybe not as aggressive. And then if you need to make any movements, you can just hold Alt or oops, I'm on Snake Hook. I should make sure I'm on the move brush. So I'll hold Alt and that will pull the mesh in the direction it's already oriented to. Okay, so if you wanted something like that, you can do that, or we can maybe thin this out a little bit. Sometimes too, I'll just use the, there's sliders under deformation that help as well. So I'll go to deformation. You can do inflate, both positive or negative. So I'll try to just thin this out a little bit. And sometimes I'll just use the actual inflate brush, but yeah, in this case, I think I'll just stick with thinning and do some movements. Okay. So again, I usually like to have this mesh be relatively simple. So if I solo this, I just want to see that it's, you know, fairly easy to manage. I might just make sure there's a little bit more inflate here. It's gotten a little too thin on the backside, so there. And then if I need to adjust, I'll use the move brush to pull this in or pull it down relative to the eyelid shape. Okay. So if I'm okay with that, then at this stage, you know, you might want to save this. I'll go to Save As. I'll save this as version 4 in this case. I don't have teeth and gums, so I'll talk about that in a minute. As mentioned, I did include in the install of this version of ZBrush the teeth and gums here, but I'll mention a few problems I had with this version. One issue is that when this is smoothed, there are some gaps here. You sort of see there's a gap between this tooth and the gums. There's a really interesting way to fix this, which is to use Move Topological. So even though this is all one big subtool, it'll recognize you're trying to grab just the one tool, and you can tuck these things in. So if there's ever gaps where, you know, the teeth are kind of pulling away from the gums, like right here that's happening, you can just pull that down and in. And we should probably do this in symmetry. There we go. So that's how I fix those gums. I do have an updated Z tool. Also, if there's a gap between teeth, having that Move Topological brush activated can help you, you know, affect and change the spacing, change the shape of the teeth, which can help affect the appearance of the smile as well, right? So we can alter the look, the personality of the character by tweaking the teeth. So yeah, this one I noticed had a lot of gaps, so I basically went up fixing those gaps just by nudging around a bunch of those tools. So I'll show you that if I go to Load Tool. Here's the updated teeth, and this has some paint as well. So if we hit D, where is it? Why is it not turning on? Geometry. Oh, it's already on. Okay, yeah, so it's just a very low poly. So I'll up the division levels to 3 or 4. So you can see that. So I added a bit of color. I fixed any kind of major gaps, at least in the front teeth, and any kind of tearing away when smoothing of the teeth from the gums, okay? So if you load that Z tool, then you can go back to your mesh that you're working on, which in my case is this one here. Is it this one? Yeah, I think so. Just go back to paints, make sure I fill those subtools with the color. There we go. So yeah, I can go to append. So if you open up the Z tool, it's loaded as a separate subtool, and you go to append. and we've got our teeth, and I'm going to just left click and drag this up to my head group. There we go. And I'll just double check to see where these things are. Let's go to transparency mode. So yeah, I'm going to just center this pivot, reset here. So I'm going to make sure that they're sort of aligned to the head. There. The other thing I've noticed is I think the looks like the teeth are a bit open, so I will close them a little bit. Yeah, maybe I'll keep the angle actually, but pull them up a bit more. So if you want, sometimes I regroup these. Often we'll regroup them. I'm going to go to Control-Shift-Click and just hide these. Okay, so this is, I believe, one group, and this upper area is another group, which is perfect. So if you ever need to adjust, again, you Control-Click on one group, and if you want to close the teeth or feel like they need to be rotated closed, then we can do that. You can either have the teeth more or less meet, right? Or there be a slight overbite or even underbite, right? Some people have that. So depending on how your character is going to look, you want the teeth to be relatively kind of touching or meeting. In this is kind of considered the neutral pose for the teeth. And something else, I'll turn off perspective. So typically speaking, what happens is your teeth actually rotate. Your jaw, a human jaw, the pivot point of that jaw is roughly about 1 centimeter to 2 centimeters in front of the opening of the ear, and about 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters down. So what I usually do is I'll mask the lower jaw. Before I do anything though, I'm going to show you or mention this. So these are my teeth. They're fairly low poly, which is fine. And before I start doing anything, I'm going to do my first layer and have a first blend shape. I'm going to do it on the teeth first, and then I'll work with this on the head. By the way, usually I prefer where the teeth to meet to be slightly below where the lips meet. Now again, depending on your character, if they have a more toothy smile or a more gummy smile, that can change. If you know you want the character to have something unique about their anatomy, the positioning of this can change. So I do typically want to position this in a spot first where, you know, if the mouth opens and the teeth open, we see the upper teeth more, right? So I typically will put them down just a slight bit from the opening. Where the teeth meet is a bit lower from where the lips meet. But again, you can vary that depending on your character. Okay, so before we start doing blend shapes, it's a good idea to go to check mesh to see if there's any errors with the mesh, because the layers / blend shapes depend on the mesh being clean, and if there's any errors in that base and you start working, you may have to redo all your work if there winds up being an error down the road. I typically also just out of habit click on Fix Mesh. Now this thing, it says it already has layers, so let me just, if there are layers on a mesh existing, you can just go to Layers and just make sure to bake all. Yeah, that should be fine. I'll go to Fix Mesh, and then Optimize is usually my third step, and we can do the same thing here with the head mesh. So I'll go to Check Mesh, there's no issues, and I'll just go to Optimize. I'll do the same thing for the brows and the eyelashes. Check Mesh, there's no problem. Optimize just in case. Oh, and I think I may have to fix the eyeballs, but we'll take a look at that in a second. Yeah, I'm going to remesh this in half maybe one more time here. 2 more times. There. That should be okay. Let me just fill this with the dark gray. Sometimes when you remesh, you'll lose your color, so there we go. Check mesh, fix. Okay, and then we'll go to the lower eyelid and do the same. Check, optimize. Okay. Last thing I should make sure of is that the lips should be closed. So I tend to use either a combination of move topological, and so if you just kind of nudge back and forth, this should help close the lips. And sometimes you won't see this when there's smoothing or very low smoothing, and that's because when you smooth something, it tends to kind of pull back open edges or areas that are creased. Okay. So that can have an impact. The other thing we're seeing here is the gums. Let's Alt-click on this to switch. If the gums are poking through, then we may just want to pull this back a little bit. So I'll just pull this back, we should have about the equivalent of anywhere between half a centimeter to a centimeter of depth in the lips. Okay. And last thing I've sort of missed in other demos is actually to shape the mouth cavity. So I do recommend you try to reshape this a bit. Oh, let me increase my smoothing here. It's very low. Right. So if the mouth cavity is sort of not encompassing the teeth and gums, then we should try to make sure it is. So yeah, I'll just hide the lips as well. So you should hopefully have nice, clean polygroups like this that help you just very quickly access this. And that way we can at least get, things relatively close to touching. Does it have to be perfect? No, but we should have a sense of, yes, the mouth cavity actually encompassing the mouth, right? And if things pop through, just let me just smooth them back a bit, okay? Again, we can either do an inflate. Inflate can be kind of the easy fix just to get that to close. Okay, so as I mentioned, the teeth and gums. Oh, let's go back here. I'll go to I'll get out of solo and go to transparency. Control click on the bottom group. I'm going to Alt reset the pivot. Actually, I'll clear the mask because the layer system gets a little bit touchy. I'm going to go to layers, and basically right now I have clean mesh. It's unmasked. If I click on new, I'm going to click on name and just call this jaw open, or yeah, I'll just call it jaw open. Okay. Sometimes this happens as well where the color will be reset for some reason. So I usually just turn this off or set things back to white. You can turn off colorize. If colorize turns black, just turn this off. I'll control click on the bottom group, and then I'll Alt reset the pivot orientation. And I do this without perspective on. And again, I usually move my pivot about 1.5 centimeters in front and about 1 centimeter down. And if we basically rotate this open, you'll get a fairly natural rotation. Usually the lower jaw can open anywhere between 15 and 20 degrees. So sometimes I'll try to push things to a pretty high extreme. So let's try about 20. What's great about this is that the way this works, the way blend shapes work, is that basically it's recording the vertices positions in space. So now if I move this, you've got, right, some jawbone action. Okay, so that's basically my open for the teeth and gums. Now I do want to finish the head prep here, so let me get out of transparency mode. I'm just going to make sure that I've attached the lashes and brows to this mesh. So I'll just move them in order here. I'm going to go to merge down, okay. Merge down, and then merge down there. Now, sometimes in some rigging scenarios, you want those eyelashes and brows separate, and you'll be kind of like constraining them to the surface of the mesh. But in this case, like I said, this is like the low tech version. So if you're doing something different with your rigging instructor, that's fine. You can keep them separate. But in this case, for my demo, I'm showing you this from a purely sculptural point of view. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to save this now. This is basically my prep prior to getting the blend shapes going. One last thing I'll mention too is that I believe in this case my eyeballs, I basically created what's called a non-polar sphere. And you can get these in ZBrush if you were to use an insert brush. So let's say if you go to B for brush, I for inserts, under IMM primitives, there is this thing called the polysphere. So one of the problems with eyeballs or spheres in general, especially inside of 3D apps, is that when you have a standard sort of sphere, it has a bunch of triangles at the pole, and typically people use that area as the iris kind of pupil zone. The one big problem with that is that you get pinching, and it looks very bad smooth. So that's why, at least even at this phase, I'll try to have some very good, simple, non-polar spheres. So I'll show you this in Maya when it's open here. Okay, so like I said, to show you this in production, if you hit 3 on a sphere, if you notice, I'll maybe make this very, very dark so it's very high contrast. Look at the reflection. You see it has these sort of triangles that appear. right? Whereas if you literally started with something that basically is a cube, okay, and then we smooth that, you will not have that at all on that surface. Now this isn't a perfect solution either because this is still kind of squared in a slight and subtle way. You know, it's a little bit warped, but the polysphere inside of ZBrush is actually very, it's non-polar, meaning that there isn't like a north and south pole with this pinching result. And it's very round. So the polysphere from the IMM tool in ZBrush is quite good. So if you have a mesh that's not that clean, that's not difficult to fix or replace. In this case, I have something similar happening in here, but you're never going to see this region, right? Because it's always going to be behind the eye, and that's not bleeding out into the rest of the face or the eyelids, right? So this should work fine. Okay, so I'll turn off Colorize, and yeah, let's go back to the standard brush here. So yeah, I've done check mesh. Everything's good for this, and I'll show you the first blend shape. So I'm going to go to layers, click on a new layer. Like I said, if things kind of go all black, you just simply turn off Colorize, and that should be okay. And for this, I'll show you what I typically do. So I basically want to mask the lower lips, lower jaw. And because of the way I've grouped things, I can Control-Shift-Click and very easily hide the upper lip, upper jaw, okay? So in this case, I'm going to, let me just use Select Lasso and hold Control-Shift-Alt and hide this. So I basically want to mask this whole kind of lower jaw region. I'm going to just, yeah, remove part of this mask here. Okay, and then I can reveal everything else and then Control-Click on this and soften it, and we'll flip the mask around. And again, I'm going to basically try to move this pivot point, right, about a centimeter, 1 to 2 centimeters in front, and then maybe 1 below. Get it a solo. Okay. I may expand the mask back up here and then just blur it one more time. So again, I think I rotate about 18 to 20 degrees, right? So if I can, I'll try to match the teeth. Let's go to transparency mode. There. So that's not too bad. Now the shape itself is a bit odd, so I'll come back and fix that a bit. So one of the things that happens with the teeth and the gums here is that they will pull downward. So I'll go to the move brush. They should kind of pull downward and start to form a bit of an O shape here, right? So that's one thing that does happen, and you can hold shift and let go. Again, you may want to hold shift and lower the intensity a bit, so I'm going to do that right now. And I'll hold shift and let go and try to just focus on the sides of the mouth. The other thing is the upper lip should pull down a bit. The nose will get pulled down a bit as well. And the teeth, the sides of the cheeks get pulled in a bit as well. So maybe looking from a 3/4 view here, if we pull in a bit, that should kind of help, right? Because there's a gap here from the teeth and gums, okay? So I'll pull that in as well, just so we kind of have almost like that tissue kind of pulling in a bit. And then I'll hold shift and let go, and that helps sort of blend the surface a little bit better. You see it looks a little bit lumpy, but when I hold shift, put my pen down or mouse left click and let go, it actually kind of averages the surfaces that are already there. And it can help this look a bit more natural and organic. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to hold shift and let go, shift and let go, shift, left click or shift pen down, let go. And sometimes just regular smoothing is also okay, just to kind of help this blend a bit better. So there is our open. I'm going to also rename this, I'll just call this open for now because I do have jaw open on the teeth, so I don't want to have the same label twice, which can mess things up in Maya. So now if we take a look, right? It's not too bad. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of inflate because if you think about animation, stretch, and squash, by the way, if you hit record, it may go back to a black color. So I'll just turn this off, colorize off, and then I'll go back to inflate. So you can create almost like a little bit of like pudge happening, right? Because the tissue has to kind of go somewhere. So you can inflate and then maybe do some smoothing again. I might increase my smooth intensity a bit more. There we go. Just to kind of like get a little bit better blend in here. There. Let me just check this. Yeah, so go back to record mode whenever you need to adjust. So I'm just going to smooth this out just with regular smoothing and not shift, let go. The difference between holding shift and smoothing and holding shift and then letting go as soon as you start moving is that holding shift and brushing will actually alter the shape quite a bit. So we do want to try to preserve some of the shapes here in the mouth. So yeah, I'll pull the bottom, oops, go back to record. Just pull the bottom lip up a little bit. Right back to record. Move brush, there. We want a bit more of a rounded shape, and the sides should come in a bit as well, right? So you got to think about the teeth and gums kind of stretching around the opening. So I'm, again, holding shift, then putting my pen down or my mouse down and letting go, okay? So that's essentially your first blend shape. Now this for me is probably the most extreme I would ever get this to move, right? In a lot of cases, you know, you want to go to the biggest extreme you can get to, but you may only get to like 70, 80% in actual animation, right? Sometimes it's going to be subtle, like 20%. Other times it'll be more extreme, okay? So that's the first blend shape. We're going to delve into more mouth shapes in a minute.